Well, thank you very much for sticking around a little bit. Let me ask you to open your Bible to the book of Job. J-O-B, just like Job. And he's right before the Psalms start. Boy, it's been great to be back in Crockett County. This is like a second home to me, and I really have enjoyed the time that I've spent with you all. And yesterday was awesome. It was a great experience. We had a lot of interest. Hopefully we helped a few people. And the reality is, bottom line is, everybody suffers loss. Old brother Bum, not a brother, but a buddy, Bum Phillips, who was a coach for the Houston Oilers and also the New Orleans Saints. He would stand on the sidelines. He had a goofy accent, and he always wore a pair of jeans and a cowboy hat, which was kind of odd on the side of an NFL football field. He made the observation one time. He said there are two kinds of NFL coaches. He said there's them that's been fired and them that's going to be fired. Well, there are two kinds of people in this world. Them that suffered loss and them that's going to suffer loss. We don't get out of this world without suffering loss. It's a reality in a broken world. And that loss causes us to struggle. We call it grief, and there's a lot of grief illiteracy. And because people don't know about grief, a lot of times they don't navigate that very difficult time in their life very effectively. You know what can help a lot of times, as Ben has suggested in his lesson, is other people. God does some of his best work through his people. I want to share with you some suggestions about helping other people who are struggling with something that's difficult in their life. The fact is, most of the problems that we deal with in this life are some form of loss. Like, for instance, when a business tanks, that's the loss of finances, the loss of financial security. When a person has an amputation, that's the loss of a limb of their body. When a person gets a cancer diagnosis, they've lost their health. When a parent has a teenage child or a young adult child or an older adult child choose to embrace the world again and leave the Lord and leave the church, that is the loss of a child in a very real sense. Almost all the struggles that we have in this life are losses, and loss causes us to experience grief. One thing that can help us deal with our loss in life, and any kind of loss in life, is other people. There's a song that you can find on YouTube. Sometime when you're on YouTube, if you want to plug in your search bar, 3 words, people need people. It's a beautiful song, has powerful lyrics. It's very, very true. When life is good, we need people. Because when we have people in our life, when life is good, that helps to maximize the joy and the blessing of that prosperity. When we're suffering adversity, we need people. People can help us tremendously to be supported and encouraging and helpful. But how do you do that? How do you provide help for people who are struggling with some form of loss in their life? Well, suggestion number 1, this may sound strange. Suggestion number 1, be just like Job's friends. Now, Job's friends are quickly and easily criticized. But if you look at the story in the book of Job, you need to reframe your thinking about Job's friends. Job chapter 1, let's remind ourselves real quickly before we get into the suggestions. Job was a good man. He was a good man on steroids because verse 1 says, blameless, upright, one that feared God and shunned evil. And I love the statement that the Lord makes in verse 8 about Job. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? You know, I think I'm going to ask my kids to put that on my memorial stone. Dad, a servant of God. That's quite a compliment for somebody to be called the servant of God. And this is not somebody else calling Job that, one of his friends. This is God calling him that, my servant Job. Not only that, look at the next statement. None like him on the earth. Blameless, upright, one who fears God and shuns evil. In other words, he was not your common, ordinary, garden variety Job. He was a great man of God. Now, Job had problems. He had a bunch of critters. Chapter 1, verse 3. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very great household. And he lost all that. He lost his prosperity. A greater blessing he had is his family. Verse 2. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now, wasn't Job a smart farmer? I'm in a room with farmers. You know, think about this. If you're going to have a big farm, it'd be great to start with a workforce of 10. 7 sons and 3 daughters. Smart Job and Mrs. Job. But he lost every one of those 10 children. There are people sitting in this room who know about the loss of a child. Either prenatally or after birth. It's heartrending. It's awful. He didn't just lose a child. He lost 10 children. His wife did too. And as a matter of fact, when his wife snapped and said, "Curse God and die," do you find it interesting that though Job tried to correct her, God never did? You know, sometimes when we experience awful things, we will say some pretty extreme things. We'll say and do things that are out of character. They're just not normal. It's not us. Because the circumstances we're dealing with have had a tremendous impact on us. Don't be surprised when you're struggling mightily in your life. When you've got a really big deal going on, don't be surprised that you are not normal. As a matter of fact, if you're normal, you better check your pulse. You must be a robot. The reality is, hard times in our life really have a tremendous effect on us. Had a tremendous effect on his wife. Yeah, she shouldn't have said what she said. She was doing what Brother Tom Holland used to say when I was in class with him. He said, you know, sometimes people just need to have a catharsis. Today we call that venting. Well, she was venting. Well, hard times. Really, really hard times. He not only lost all those things, he lost his health. Sat there with a broken piece of pottery, a potsherd, and scraped his skin. He was in awful condition. He was a mess. His wife was a mess. They were a mess because they were humans. See, we're not robots. We're not an engine in a car. We're not a laptop. We're not a tree or a flower. We're the product of God's creative work. Uniquely, we are human. And human beings are not like machines. Human beings have a thinker and a feeler. And boy, it is a challenge in a broken world to be a mere mortal human being. So here Job is. He's struggling. Well, I don't know what form of media they had back then, but he had friends that got wind of the fact his life crashed. Chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 11. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one of them from his own place, and then they're identified. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they made an appointment together to come. Note here that when Job's friends heard about the mess that his life was, they didn't send him an email, didn't give him a call or send him a text and say, "Hey, we heard you hit on hard times. How about you just coming on over to our house?" They didn't do that. They came to him. Now, do you figure that those 3 friends had something else to do? Do you think they had a life? I know if they were married, they had a wife, because that means they have a honey-do list. You figure they had a job? It didn't matter. They dropped everything. I don't know how far it was that they came from where they were to where Job was, but they came. That's what we need to do when people are hurting and we know that they're struggling. Don't be feeding me this line. You can't do that because that's out of your comfort zone. Let me tell you what that is. Let me be real blunt with you. When a person doesn't do what God wants them to do in the way of helping other people because it would be a threat to their comfort zone, that is a form of idolatry. The idol is the comfort zone. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter what it's going to cause you to think about or how difficult or challenging it's going to be. Suck it up. Drop everything in your life and you go to that person. Now, you may really struggle because of that. It may be a scary thing for you to do that. But it's not about you. It's about the other person. Job's 3 friends did exactly what is the best thing to do when people are struggling. Go to them. Drop everything in your life and you go to them. Because you going to them will be something they will always remember in their life. It will be a tremendous boost to their morale. Because hardship in life can cause you to feel really lonely. All by yourself. Not only did they come. Notice Job 2 verse 11. They came for the right reason. They came to mourn him and comfort him. They did not come to nail him to the wall, to make a bunch of bold accusations that were going to be hurtful to him. They did not come for that reason. They came for the right reason. It wasn't for their self-satisfaction either. They came because it was all about him, to mourn with him and comfort him. Sometimes, though, when we go to people, and we go to them even with the right motives, we mess up. Now that's what happened to them. Later on, they did mess up, but initially, they're doing the right thing. They came to him, and they came to him for the right reason. By the way, something I mentioned yesterday, and since some of you were not here, let me mention this. If you want an education, you might want to go to Google and ask Miss Google to take you to a place called Dumb Things Caring People Say. See, just because you're a caring person doesn't mean you're going to say the right thing. You can be a caring person and say something way out of line that's going to be terribly hurtful, and that's exactly what Job's friends did later. But initially, they were doing all the right things. Number one, they came to him. Number two, they came with the right motive. It was all about Job and his struggles. Then notice chapter 2, verse 12. And when they had raised their eyes from afar, they did not recognize him. They lifted their voices and wept. Sometimes people feel uncomfortable tearing up or crying in the presence of others. Get over it. It's not about you. The reason why you cry is because God gifted you with that ability. It is very, very helpful. You may have heard somebody say sometime, or maybe you've even said it, I had a good cry. That's exactly why God gave you the ability to cry. I remember being scared to death when my mother cooked with a pressure cooker. The old-fashioned ones, not the new fancy ones. The old-fashioned ones. And when that thing would just bobble up there and I was thinking about all the pressure in a pressure cooker, I was just waiting for that thing to explode. It was scary. Well, what happens when you put too much air in a balloon? It's going to pop. You know, sometimes what happens is we just stuff it. It's okay to cry. It's okay to cry in the church building. It's okay to cry in your bedroom, in your house, at the public school building. There are times we need to cry. Don't ever say, in the presence of somebody else, when you're tearing up or crying, I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. You've done nothing wrong. Crying is a good thing to do. Well, that's what they did. They were choosing to weep with the one that was weeping. Job was a mess. He was pitiful. And they were touched by his circumstances. And they cried in his presence. They raised their voices, lifted up their voices. Each one tore his robe, sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. What are they doing? They're mourning with him. They're doing what they did back then in order to show their concern. He was having friends in his presence, actively participating in his mourning. Now, they're not the ones that suffered all this loss. It was Job, but they're doing that for him. That's exactly what we need to do. Not these specific traditions, but the things that will communicate to that person that you are with them. You have their back. You want to help them because you really care. That's exactly what his three friends were doing. Then it says, after each tore his robe, sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven, they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. They were not in lazy boys. They were in the uncomfortable position of sitting on the ground. And they sat there for days. The best ministry done to help hurting people is the ministry of presence. You be in their presence. See, some people won't do that. Makes them feel uncomfortable. Brings them back painful memories. It's not about you. We need to realize that Christianity is not about convenience. It's not about comfort. It's about two things: conviction and compassion. And when we have compassion, what we will do is we'll throw ourselves under the bus. We'll realize that it may make us feel uncomfortable. It may bring back some awful memories. We may lose sleep for 2 or 3 days because we've exposed ourselves to that hurtful situation. But that's what God wants us to do. He didn't save us to keep distant from hurting people or to walk a convenient, comfortable path. He wants us to sacrifice. Well, they sat down for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him. Now, if those were 3 female friends, I don't think that was possible. 7 days and 7. Don't take offense, women. But it is true. They've done studies. They've actually tagged men and women, and they've done studies about this. The typical woman says about 30,000 words in a day. Typical man, about 15,000. Now, women have told me the reason why they speak twice as many words is they can't get the men to listen to them, and so they have to say everything at least twice. Well, they sat there for 7 days and 7 nights in silence. You know, sometimes we place upon ourselves unnecessary burden when we think that we have to go with a package of words to communicate to somebody who's hurting, as if we had answers. I mean, how in the world can you say the appropriate words? Sometimes the things that people experience in life are just beyond words. There just are no words. What we need to realize is presence is way more important than words. Do you know oftentimes, if we do choose to speak, the reason the words are remembered is because they were hurtful, not helpful. Again, I encourage you, plug in dumb things caring people say. On that list, you will probably find things that you have said. You'll find things that I have said, but not anymore. So with the ministry of presence, they served him. 7 days and 7 nights, no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was great. Now, you know what happened. They opened their big fat mouth, made all kinds of terrible accusations against Job, made his life miserable. Why did they do that? They thought they were doing the right thing. But were they? Hardly. It gets so bad that in chapter 19, it begins this way. Then Job answered and said, "How long will you torment my soul and break me in pieces with words?" Presence is way more important than words. We need to be real careful about our words. Because here's the reality. Nobody knows everything about anything. Nobody. Job's 3 friends talked as if they knew what was going on. Old brother Charles Hodge, on the banks of Onion Creek, wrote many good things. And here's one of the things that he said. He said, faith does not give us the answers. Faith gives us the ability to live without answers. There are times there are no answers. We wonder why, don't we? But sometimes we just can't know. This side of eternity, we may never know. But we don't have to if we have faith. Trust. If we keep communicating to God, as Ben has suggested, and if we continue to listen to Him, and we do with a humble spirit, where we want to receive the message and embrace that in our life and live like we really believe it, and we make it a point to be an active participant in the fellowship of God's people, yes, we can make it. We may hurt. We may feel very weak. We may struggle mightily. We may on occasion in the journey snap, say and do things that are just not appropriate. But we have a long-suffering, patient God in heaven who knows what a mess we are. And I'm so thankful that He is that way, because we're not always going to do it right. But some way, somehow, it's with a simple, trusting faith. We just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other in the right direction. And it's called heaven. Be like Job's friends initially. But don't be like Job's friends in thinking that you have all the answers and then trying to dictate to them by your words what their perspective ought to be and how they ought to move along in life. In Psalm 31, the trusting heart of David cried out to God in a terrible time in his life. In Psalm 31, verse 3, lead me and guide me. God is the one that needs to lead that hurting person and guide that hurting person in that right direction called heaven. I finished with these words. Words that were sung at my wife's memorial service. Words that I keep repeating to myself because I need to hear them. Often I'm hindered on my way. Burden so heavy I almost fall. Then I hear Jesus sweetly say, heaven will surely be worth it all. Heaven will surely be worth it all, worth all the troubles that here befall. After this life, with all of its strife, heaven will surely be worth it all. It will be, because God's told us that in His book. But between here and there are going to be some tough times, some big losses, some huge struggles when we're going to feel mighty weak. But boy, what a blessing we can be to one another. Some of God's best blessings are the people He providentially provides in our lives. Not just our family, but the family of God, and maybe even a neighbor or a friend. Let's appreciate what God has done for us and keep taking every step toward the ultimate goal, heaven.